All right, Neil, I've got something for you.
Excellent.
You don't get to keep that.
I'll see you later, Cam. Yep. This is payment for today's videos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of questions on the YouTube channel.
Yes.
Asking, how do I select the right frame size for me? We're not talking pizza sizes here, small, medium, and large.
Small, medium, large.
How do I select the right frame size for me?
Yeah, mate. This is one of those videos. There are, as I said to you before, there's caveats within caveats within caveats to this, and this is shades of grey everywhere. So you can take everything I say with a grain of salt on this one, because there are so many possible complications which would mess up the overly simplified 12-minute video that we're going to do. That this is one of those things that is not as easy as you would like to think, and it's not as logical as you'd like to think either. So with frame geometries, there is three main dimensions that you really want to be the most careful of. There's the effective top tube length, which is basically taken from a center point here horizontally when the bike is perfectly level, horizontally to an imaginary intersection point where that horizontal line would meet the center of the seat tube.
Yep.
That's how most manufacturers measure effective top tube.
Right.
Not all.
Really? Okay.
Most. There's the head tube length. Now the head tube length is generally taken with no bearings or anything in the frame, and it's basically the dimension of that section there, right? So this gives you roughly the height of the front end. Most road bikes have a similar fork axle to crown height, which is basically the dimension from there to the center of the wheel's axle.
Yep.
So assuming that is not drastically different, like on a gravel bike or something, that'll be taller because of the clearance of the fork and everything. But assuming it's a road bike, right?
Yep.
You can take that as being a pretty similar dimension. And then the other thing that you need to be wary of is the seat tube angle. And this basically, the angle of this tube here relative to vertical,
yep,
dictates how forward or rearward the
yep,
saddle will be placed on the rails, right? So these three dimensions are the ones that you want to look for. You don't want to go off purely reach and stack. Everyone has this idea that reach and stack is the way to go only. Reach and stack refer to the position of the bars relative to the bottom bracket center. Neither of them take any bearing of the rider's, the most important thing, which is the position of the rider's pelvis relative to the crank. So reach and stack refer to the front end only, whereas we're very interested in where the rider's pelvis is relative to the cranks, and then secondary to that, where the rider's bars are relative to the pelvis or the cranks, once you know that the seat is in the right position. So these three dimensions are the ones that you need to be careful of. And essentially, when you're choosing a frame size, you don't want to run out of adjustment in any of the dimensions. That's really the critical thing, because over time, your front end height might vary a little bit as you get more flexible, you lose a bit of weight, you gain a bit of weight, less flexible. Your seat setback might vary slightly because you're trying different saddles. Your seat height might vary because you alter the saddles, or you change your cleat position, or you change some shoes or something. So you want to be able to go up and down, forward and back, and up and down in the front, and then also not run out of stem length. So you want to build in to your frame geometry that you choose a little bit of ability to adjust. You don't want to be hard up on the end range. So you don't want to choose a frame geometry where you have to use a 70mm stem. And if you go to an 80, it's too long, because that means that you're on the limit of that frame's geometry.
So if you're on the border, are you better off going the smaller one or the larger one?
Depends which dimension you're on the border of.
Okay, right.
If you're on the border of, let's say you've got a 40mm stack of spaces underneath the stem, and you're thinking the drop is still too low to the bars, and you're still wanting to get the bars higher, the main dimension that you will want to alter is this one. Right. So you might want to go with something which has got the same top tube length, yes, but a taller head tube.
Okay, like an endurance geometry versus a all-round, or...
That's it,
yep.
Yeah. The main differences you'll see with your endurance versus your racing geometries, basically endurance bikes will have a slightly taller head tube. They may have a slightly slacker seat tube angle, and bear in mind, as the seat tube angle goes back, it pulls the front end towards you. So an effective top tube of, say, 520mm, if the seat tube angle is lazier, the front end is actually coming back, because that dimension stays the same. The front end will come back as the seat tube angle changes.
Right.
So it's triangles and trigonometry all over the place. The best thing you can do is consult a good bike fitter who can advise you on it. So if you're starting out and you've most of the people that are viewing this will already have a road bike. So I'll go over that first. Let's say that you've already got a road bike and you're generally happy with your position. And you're looking for which frame will suit me the best. The way that you want to do this is to extrapolate from a known comfortable position and a known set of frame geometries. So let's say we're on this Factor 2 VAM here, and was yours a 54?
54.
So 54, and it's got, let's say the top tube is 540 millimeters effective, and the head tube here is 130 millimeters, and the seat tube angle is 74 degrees. Let's say, for example, Cam, that your seat, to get comfortable, everything feeling good, the seat is pushed all the way back on the rails, as far as it can go. What would you want out of your next frame? You would want a frame with a slightly lazier seat tube angle so that you could move that seat clamp further back into the center of the saddle's rails and it wouldn't be on its limit.
Yes.
Let's say the saddle was pushed all the way forward and you still were thinking, gee, I still feel like I want to come further forward. You would probably want to look for something with a slightly steeper seat tube angle. Let's say that you were running a 130 millimeter stem. You might look for something with a longer top tube by 20 millimeters, just so you can run a 110. Let's say that you've got a huge spacer stack on top here, 50 millimeters of spacer, because you just can't get down to the front end. You look for something with a taller front end. And really those three things are what you want to look for. The clamp position of the saddle on the rails. If it's pushed all the way forward, you might want something steeper. If it's pushed all the way back, you might want something lazier. And I won't go into zero offset seat posts and layback seat posts at the moment because it's a bit too deep. The front end height, similarly, if you're thinking, gee, I'm running a minus 17 degree stem just to get the bars low enough to feel comfortable because I'm hyper flexible, might look for something with a lower head tube, lower dimension here. So those three critical dimensions, you just want to, you want to kind of look for something where you can run a stem that's somewhere between 90 and 130 millimeters, with an ideal being kind of 100 or 110. That will give you room to play. That means that the top tube is roughly the right length. If you have a massively weird looking front end where there's a huge spacer stack and the bars are super high, look for something that's taller. If your saddle is pushed all the way forward or back, look for different changes in the seat tube angle. Those three things are the three kind of things that you don't want to be running out of adjustment on them. So what you do is you look up the geometry of your current frame. You get those three numbers, you pull them out of the table, and you go, right, well, ideally, I think I would like to run a longer stem on the next bike that I buy. So I'm going to find something with a slightly shorter top tube. But as I go down in size, I've got to make sure that this doesn't get too short as well. And then you go and look at bikes that tickle your fancy and see if they fall into those ranges. And those three things are your critical things. Don't just go off reach and stack because they neglect the position of the back end. And they, as we said it before, if the seat tube angle changes, the effective top tube moves the front forward and back and all this kind of stuff. So go off those three dimensions if you can. Sketch it out on a piece of paper. It'll help you to try and visualize it. When you've done it 1,000 times, it's really straightforward. But the first time you're doing it, you'll be thinking, right, this is trigonometry and angles and triangles. So the best way is to extrapolate from your known comfortable position and the known geometry of the frame that you're on right now, and then build an ideal set of frame dimensions. Write them down: the seat tube angle, the effective top tube, and the head tube length. And they will come into a range. The top tube might be between 130 and 140, and that's okay. And if it's 150, you'll be all right. But if it's 160, it'll be too tall and you won't be able to get the bars low enough. Same thing with the seat tube angle. You vary it by half a degree and it'll be okay. But if you get something that's 2 degrees steeper, you won't be able to clamp your saddle in the right spot. So you'll have a range, and then you go shopping for frames and styles of bike which may fit into that range. And that's really the best way of doing it, is to use a known comfortable position and a known frame geometry to extrapolate to an ideal set of frame geometries. And an even better way is to have a really good bike fit. And then ride the bike for an hour. Ride the bike for a month. Make sure that you're completely comfortable, everything's great, and then ask the bike fitter, hey, what's the ideal frame geometry for me? It's something that I do with almost every client who's looking for a new bike. And that's even better because then you're less inclined to make mistakes. If you can't get a good bike fitter in your region, try and find a comfortable position that feels great, ride it for a month, and then extrapolate out these three dimensions. If you don't know the dimensions, measure them. The one that you can't measure easily is the seat tube angle, but you can easily measure your effective top tube, and you can easily measure your head tube length.
Yep.
Yeah, and that'll get you pretty close. Of all three dimensions, the seat tube angle is the least critical, unless it's a huge frame, because the longer that seat height gets, the more a slight angle adjustment moves the clamp on the saddle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the best way.
Okay. Well, what about if somebody is just getting into road cycling? Are you about to go into this?
Yeah.
And they've never bought a bike before, or maybe they're doing some commuting on a hybrid, or they're doing some mountain biking. They want to try road, and they've clicked on this video and they're not sure.
Yeah, this is where it gets really tricky and really messy, and there is no easy answer to this. The best answer is to go and see a competent bike fitter, preferably an independent one, not someone at a bike shop who's going to sell you that, the two models that they've got in the shop, or the three, and get them to extrapolate for you before you go. If that's just not going to happen, and you've got to purchase something, the general manufacturer's guides in terms of the body height and that kind of stuff are reasonably good places to start, right? It's very unlikely if you're let's say you're 6 foot tall, you're 180 centimeters or so, it's very unlikely you're going to want a 52.
Yep.
Yeah, you're probably going to be on a 56, maybe a 58. If you're right in the middle of one of their ranges and you think that your body is fairly normal, you think, well, I'm reasonably normally flexible, I'm not horrifically stiff, I can touch my toes, I don't have crazy long arms or short arms or really long legs and a short torso like myself does, for example. If you think that you're going to be fairly normal, those recommendations are not a terrible place to start. And look, you can raise stems, you can change stem length, you can move seats around. There's a lot of adjustment built into road bikes in most cases. So if you think you're going to be pretty straightforward, it's not a terrible place to start going off the manufacturer's recommended heights. If you think, or from looking at yourself, that you've got very short legs and a long torso, and this would be more commonly found in certain genotypes, particularly Southeast Asian riders. They tend to be really strong in the legs. They have short femurs, short tibias, long torsos. They're really powerful on the legs. These guys often, or ladies, often end up going down a frame size because their legs are short, their seat height needs to be relatively low, and their torsos are long. So they end up on one size lower than what you'd expect for their height, with a long stem on the front, because their torsos are relatively long. They often tend to be quite flexible, and they will often end up wanting to go down a frame size just so that they can get the front end low enough, and they end up running a long stem, like a 110, a 120, 130. That's certainly not a hard and fast rule, but if you think that you're built with short legs and a long torso, definitely try the frame size below what you think you would be.
Yep.
If you're built definitively with long legs and a short torso like myself, very worthwhile trying up a size, because the rider's effectively short torso, they won't be able to get down to the low front end of the smaller frame size as easily, so they may want to try one up, and also because their seat height's going to be really high, relative to their body length. So the seat's going to be high, therefore the bars, all else being equal, the bars may need to be higher as well. So the next frame size up might be worth a try, simply because the head tube will be a bit taller.
Yes.
They may also want to try more of an endurance orientated frame, simply to get the height in the front end to match their seat height. You can imagine if you've got a seat height of, say, 800 millimeters versus 700, there's a 10 centimeter difference. If the riders are equally flexible, they will need, and their torsos are the same length, they will need their front end 10 centimeters lower or higher, So if you're very long in the leg, just to get a reasonable amount of drop to the bars, you may need a bike that's quite tall in the front end. If you're very short in the leg, you're going to have a little bit of seat post out of the frame. You may end up struggling just to get the front end low enough. So you may be more, if you're short in the leg, long in the torso, and moderately flexible, you may be looking at a very race orientated geometry with a super low front end, just to get a normal amount of drop to the bars, because your seat is not far out of the frame.
Yep.
So those are kind of the only two really strong recommendations. Short in the leg, long in the torso. Try going down a size from what you think would be right. Sometimes even 2 sizes if you're very flexible, and you may feel much more comfortable on a really small frame with a long stem on it, potentially that's even angled down quite steeply, just to get a reasonable amount of drop to the bars.
Yes.
If you're really long in the leg and short in the torso, you may want to go up a size to an endurance orientated frame just to get the height in the front end to match your seat height, so that you've got that same relative amount of drop to the bars. And that's probably one of the best ways is to kind of take a look at your own morphology. If you're hyper flexible, you might be looking at a more race orientated frame just to get enough drop to the bars. If you're really upright, take some footage of yourself riding. If you're really upright with a C-shaped spine, look for something that's probably going to be taller in the front end, because you'll struggle to get down to a race geometry frame with a low head tube. And a bit of sleuthing, a little bit of let's get my other half to take a photo of me when I'm riding on a trainer. I'll have a look at my posture. We'll have a look at the relative length of my legs relative to my overall height, and then gravitate towards frames that are either low in the front or high in the front, short in the top tube, long in the top tube, using those kind of basic recommendations.
Okay.
I wish it could be simpler than this.
No, clearly everyone's different, so it's not. Yeah.
Mate.
Is there a safe bet? Because I find with, say, an example, some people just getting into the sport, they'll go for a cheaper style frame like an LA Sprint. An LA Sprint has a much greater or more aggressive geometry than even the Venge, or the old Venge now.
Yeah.
And as a result, they find it uncomfortable because it's an aggressive geometry, and they're just getting into road cycling. They didn't realise how low the top tube was, as an example. So is there a safe bet people can take, or not necessarily, because everyone's different?
Yeah, man, I wish there was.
Okay.
I wish there was. The best thing to do, perhaps, if this is an expensive purchase, these things are many thousands of dollars. If it was a car, you'd sit down and look at the pros and cons of each car. This one's got a big boot, that one's got a large engine, it's going to use more fuel, this one's more fuel efficient. Same thing with the bikes. Write down what you think you're going to want out of it. Well, I know that I'm long in the leg and short in the torso. I know I'm very inflexible. There's no way I'm going to want a super aggressive race geometry frame, because I'm just not going to be able to get down low enough to the bars.
Yes.
Or I know that I'm short and hyper flexible, so I may want to go down a frame size from what I think is right, and look for really aggressive race geometry bikes. And you make some broad extrapolations if you don't have access to a good quality bike fitter who can give you some concrete recommendations, and then go and try them. Most high-end bikes, you can take them for test rides. Rock up at the shop, say, hey man, I think that I'm going to be on this is going to be the way for me. Can you lower the front end down, and I'm going to put my seat height where I think I'll feel comfortable, and see how it feels. Even though it's low in the front and you've got a fair bit of drop, if it feels more comfortable, it probably is correct.
Yes.
Don't assume because you're young, old, flexible, inflexible, short in the torso, long in the torso, don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking, well, I'm definitely going to be on an endurance geometry frame or a race geometry frame. It's always best to try one of each. If you're going to Giant, you've got the Defy and the TCR. Try them both.
Yep.
You're going to specialise. Try Roubaix. If it feels way, way, way nicer than the tarmac, well, you probably prefer the extra height in the front end. So don't be afraid to test them. Testing them really is, in the absence of a better solution, is one of the best ways. Yeah. It's not an easy thing, and it gets really complex. If the rider is a big heel dropper and their seat height therefore needs to be 40 millimeters lower than their identical twin who's a toe pointer, all else being equal, the height of the front end for that rider can vary by 40 millimeters.
Yes.
It's just not an easy thing to do. And therefore, I always say to people, if you've got access to a good quality bike fitter, take your current bike in, get fitted on that, and then look for new frames with their help. And then refitting the person on a new frame is a 20-30 minute process. Once you've got a known position that's been measured, I can replicate it on another bike in 20 minutes. It's easy, So you don't have to go through the whole fitting process again. Yeah.
Okay.
But not an easy one, mate. And I wish it was just A plus B equals C, and this is what you do.
Well, the 3 recommendations make a lot of sense. So there's definitely some good takeaways there.
Yeah.